Oklahoma carries an older, quieter history beneath its wide plains and rolling hills. Long before recorded history, ancient cultures carved mysterious symbols into stone, built ceremonial mounds, shaped copper into sacred objects, and left behind structures whose true purposes are still debated today. These mysteries do not demand attention or announce themselves loudly. Instead, they remain scattered across the landscape, waiting patiently for anyone willing to slow down, look closer, and recognize the traces of the people who once lived there, long before the modern world ever arrived. The Black Mesa stone circles belong to a part of Oklahoma that barely feels connected to the rest of the state. Rising quietly from the far western panhandle, Black Mesa stretches across the landscape as a high, windswept plateau where the horizon seems impossibly distant and the land opens in every direction without interruption. The air feels thinner there. The sunlight appears sharper, harsher somehow, and the earth beneath your feet is scattered with dark volcanic stone. It is the highest point in Oklahoma, yet it never announces itself dramatically. You simply arrive and realize you are standing somewhere that feels ancient in a way difficult to explain clearly. Scattered across portions of the mesa are mysterious stone circles that resist fitting into any obvious historical narrative. They are not enormous structures. Some span only a few feet, while others spread wider in carefully arranged rings of stone placed with noticeable intention. At first glance, they are easy to dismiss as random formations or remnants of relatively recent human activity. Yet the longer you look, the harder that explanation becomes to accept. The patterns repeat too consistently. The placement feels too deliberate.
These circles are not careless piles of rock left behind by chance. The stones appear selected rather than gathered randomly from nearby ground. In many examples, the rocks differ slightly from the surrounding terrain, lighter in color or smoother in texture, as though chosen specifically to stand apart visually. The spacing between stones feels measured. The rings are usually complete rather than broken, and many occupy slightly elevated ground. Whoever arranged them clearly intended for them to be noticed, though not from great distances. You have to stand close before fully recognizing what you are seeing. Humans have moved through the Black Mesa region for thousands of years. Archaeological evidence points to Paleo-Indian, Archaic, and later Plains cultures traveling through or temporarily settling here over long stretches of time. Water is limited, but reliable springs exist nearby, and migrating game would have passed through seasonally. This was never a densely populated center of permanent settlement, but it was not an empty wilderness either. People returned to this landscape repeatedly across generations, and that repeated return matters when trying to understand the stone circles themselves. The circles do not appear closely connected to permanent dwellings or long-term habitation sites. There are no obvious remains of large structures nearby, no clearly associated storage pits, and few signs of extensive domestic activity surrounding them. That absence suggests they were likely not ordinary living spaces. If people used these circles regularly, the purpose may have extended beyond everyday survival or shelter. One common interpretation proposes that the circles served as anchors for temporary structures, such as teepees or windbreaks held in place by stones. Similar stone rings appear throughout parts of the Great Plains, where historic encampments once stood. Yet the Black Mesa circles complicate that explanation. Several are positioned in highly exposed locations, where practical shelter would have been difficult. Others lack the distinct entry gaps typically associated with domestic stone rings. Some appear too carefully aligned and intentionally placed to feel entirely functional. The mystery deepens when those alignments are considered more closely. Certain circles seem oriented toward particular points along the horizon. From some rings, distant landmarks line up in ways that feel deliberate rather than accidental. In a handful of cases, the circles appear loosely connected to sunrise or sunset positions during important seasonal transitions.
The alignments are not precise enough to classify the site as an astronomical observatory, but they are consistent enough to suggest awareness and intentional observation.
Black Mesa itself naturally lends itself to watching the sky and landscape. From that elevation, storms become visible long before they arrive, rolling across the plains like moving walls in the distance. At night, stars appear unusually sharp and clear, unobstructed by forests or hills. For cultures deeply connected to seasonal cycles and environmental patterns, this would have been a powerful place to track time, observe change, and anchor ritual life to the movements of the natural world. Some archaeologists believe the circles may have carried ceremonial or communal significance tied to seasonal gatherings. Groups traveling across the plains may have treated Black Mesa as a meeting ground where rituals were performed before communities separated again and continued their migrations. In that interpretation, the circles may have defined sacred spaces, temporarily activated during gatherings, and then intentionally left behind afterward. There is also the possibility that the builders never intended these structures to survive permanently. The circles may have been created with the understanding that wind, weather, and time would eventually scatter them back into the land. That impermanence aligns with cultures that valued cycles and renewal over permanence and monument building. In such traditions, the act of arranging the stones may have mattered more than preserving them forever.
What stands out immediately is how little additional modification surrounds the circles. There are no elaborate carvings, no towering markers, no decorative additions beyond the circular forms themselves. Yet circles carry powerful symbolic weight across human cultures. They imply continuity, enclosure, balance, and separation without hierarchy. A circle creates an inside and an outside, while treating every point along its edge equally. Standing inside one of the rings today creates a strange sensation that is difficult to describe logically. Even without understanding the original purpose, you instinctively feel the boundary created by the stones. Black Mesa itself deepens that impression. The mesa is capped with basalt formed by ancient volcanic flows, making it geologically distinct from the surrounding plains. The dark stone absorbs and radiates heat differently, creating subtle environmental changes noticeable even now. To people living closely with the land, those differences would have carried meaning. Landscapes that behave differently often become spiritually or culturally significant. No single cultural group can be linked conclusively to the circles. They may represent multiple periods of use, constructed, reused, altered, and reinterpreted over generations. A ceremonial site created by one community may later have become a boundary marker, meeting place, or sacred location for another, simply because earlier people had already marked the space. That continuity without certainty frustrates modern attempts at explanation. Modern audiences tend to want labels, fixed dates, and simple conclusions. But the Black Mesa stone circles resist that kind of certainty. They remain exposed to wind and time, refusing to offer a single clear narrative. Archaeologists themselves often approach them cautiously, aware that imposing one explanation risks oversimplifying something that may have evolved over centuries through multiple cultural meanings. Visiting the area today feels very different from exploring a managed archaeological attraction or heavily interpreted historical park. There are few crowds, often no fences, and sometimes no signs at all. The land feels indifferent to human presence. It is entirely possible to walk past a circle without noticing it, only to turn back later and suddenly recognize the pattern clearly, almost as though the landscape decided to reveal it slowly rather than immediately. That experience mirrors the mystery itself. These circles do not demand attention or announce their significance openly. They wait quietly until someone notices them, and once seen, they subtly transform how the entire landscape feels.
Robbers Cave lies hidden within the rugged ridges of the Sans Bois Mountains in southeastern Oklahoma, a place where the landscape feels far older than the names written across modern maps. Steep sandstone cliffs rise above the forest floor, marked by iron-red stains, fractured ledges, shadowed crevices, and narrow overhangs that seem intentionally concealed from the outside world. Long before park signs appeared here, and long before outlaws transformed the cave into legend, people were visiting this place for reasons that still remain uncertain, quietly carving symbols into the stone. Many hikers pass the site without noticing the petroglyphs at all, yet those carvings hint that Robbers Cave once carried a meaning far deeper than its later reputation as a refuge for bandits and fugitives. The first thing most people notice about the markings is how restrained they appear. These are not massive or dramatic images carved to dominate the rock face. Many are shallow, weathered, and subtle, almost hesitant. Lines cross over one another, curves repeat in strange rhythms, and symbols appear unfinished or deliberately abstract. At first glance, some nearly disappear into the stone itself. You have to stop, adjust your eyes to the texture and shifting light before the carvings begin to reveal themselves.
That subtle quality immediately raises questions. These markings were likely never intended to impress outsiders or strangers passing through. They seem designed for people who already understood their meaning before seeing them. The carvings appear across sheltered rock walls and overhangs rather than deep inside the cave itself, and that placement feels significant. They occupy spaces where sunlight reaches during specific hours of the day, where echoes soften and linger, where the outside world meets the darker interior spaces of the cliffs. It creates the feeling of a threshold, neither fully open nor fully hidden. Across many ancient cultures, these in-between spaces were often treated as spiritually powerful places where communication with forces beyond ordinary life felt possible. The symbols themselves resist simple explanation. There are zigzag patterns, concentric circles, ladder-like shapes, and forms resembling footprints, claws, or branching paths. Some appear sharply geometric, while others seem organic and flowing. A few even look intentionally incomplete, as though the act of carving mattered more than the finished image left behind afterward.
What is especially striking is what the petroglyphs do not show. There are no clear hunting scenes, no recognizable animals carved in detail, and no obvious storytelling panels like those found in other parts of North America.
That absence deepens the mystery. If these markings served as records, they were not records of ordinary daily life. Archaeologists generally connect the carvings to ancestral Caddoan peoples or related woodland period cultures, although assigning them to one specific group remains difficult. The Sonsboy region served as a crossroads for thousands of years. Different groups traveled through these mountains, leaving traces that overlap and blur clear historical timelines. One remarkable detail is the lack of obvious stylistic change in the carvings across long periods of time. Symbols believed to have been carved centuries apart sometimes appear nearly identical. That consistency suggests traditions preserved carefully over generations, rather than spontaneous expressions made by isolated individuals. One widely discussed theory proposes that the Robbers Cave petroglyphs functioned primarily as ceremonial markers, rather than messages meant to be interpreted. In that view, the carvings were not created to explain stories or communicate information directly. Instead, they marked participation in rituals, rites of passage, or seasonal gatherings. The symbol itself mattered less than the action of carving it into the stone. This could explain why many markings overlap or cluster tightly together, layered across one another, without concern for visual clarity. The wall was not meant to serve as a canvas, it served as a witness. Standing there today, it is surprisingly easy to sense that intention. The atmosphere changes around the carvings. The space does not encourage loud conversation or distraction. Sound behaves differently among the cliffs. Wind shifts abruptly through narrow rock passages, and even on crowded days, there are sudden moments of silence when the forest seems to pause completely. It becomes easy to imagine small groups gathered close to the wall, focused and deliberate, aware that this place demanded attention
and respect.
Another interpretation connects the carvings to movement through the mountains and territorial boundaries. Robbers Cave sits beside natural passageways that would have existed long before modern trails. The symbols may have marked safe routes, seasonal access points, or agreements between neighboring groups. Yet that theory raises questions as well. If the carvings were primarily directional markers, clearer symbols repeated consistently along travel paths might be expected. Instead, the markings feel deeply tied to this single location, personal to the cave itself, rather than intended to guide travelers elsewhere. There is also the lingering question of why this place later became linked to outlaw legends. Although those stories belong to a much more recent era, they may reflect something people sensed long before written history. Figures such as Jesse James and Belle Starr did not choose the area randomly. The cave offers concealment, but it also provides extraordinary visibility. From certain ledges, the surrounding forested hills stretch outward for miles. It is both a hiding place and a lookout point. Ancient peoples almost certainly recognized the same advantages, not only for survival, but for symbolic reasons as well. The ability to observe without being observed has long carried a sense of power.
Another detail that deepens the mystery is the durability of the carvings themselves. Despite centuries of weather, erosion, and human activity, many symbols remain recognizable enough for patterns to emerge. That survival suggests careful technique and deliberate placement. These were not careless marks scratched into random surfaces. The carvers understood the stone intimately. They knew which surfaces would endure, where shadows would offer protection, and how certain angles of light would reveal or conceal the symbols. Such knowledge implies generations of familiarity with this exact place. There is still no universal agreement about what the petroglyphs ultimately represent. Some researchers see connections to cosmological ideas, sky observation, seasonal cycles, or concepts of balance and transformation. Others argue that modern viewers may be searching too hard for symbolic meanings when the original purpose was more experiential than representational. In that interpretation, the carvings were less about communicating fixed ideas and more about participating in a meaningful act connected to the landscape itself.
That uncertainty is part of what separates Robbers Cave from many more famous rock art sites. It refuses to resolve into a simple narrative. It does not provide an easy explanation or a story that can be summarized neatly in a few sentences. Instead, the site leaves behind an impression, the persistent feeling that something important happened here, repeatedly over long stretches of time, and that whatever occurred did not need to justify itself to future generations. Today, Robbers Cave State Park is known for hiking trails, climbing routes, and family camping trips. Visitors laugh among the rocks, children scramble across ledges, and the forest often feels welcoming and ordinary. Yet stepping away from the main path and standing before the carved stone changes that atmosphere immediately. The petroglyphs do not compete for attention or demand admiration. They simply wait. Without realizing it, people lower their voices, move closer to the wall, and become quieter. There have also been losses over time. Some carvings have faded through erosion, while others have been damaged by graffiti or careless visitors touching the stone surfaces. Preservation efforts continue, but like many ancient sites, Robbers Cave exists in a fragile balance between public access and permanent vulnerability. It is open enough to be visited and appreciated, yet vulnerable enough to be changed forever by only a handful of destructive actions.
The Spiro copper plates emerged from a place that carried enormous influence centuries before Oklahoma ever existed as a state or even a name. Near the Arkansas River, east of where modern highways now cut through quiet farmland, the Spiro mounds still rise gently from the earth. To most people passing by, they appear to be nothing more than grassy hills resting beneath an open sky. Yet hidden inside one of those mounds, the Craig Mound, Archaeologists encountered a discovery so advanced and unexpected that it completely changed long-held assumptions about what ancient societies in North America were capable of achieving. When the copper plates first came to light during the early 1930s, they were not uncovered carefully by trained researchers or preserved in their original arrangement. Looters reached them first. The chamber was torn open, artifacts were ripped apart, scattered, damaged, and sold individually before archaeologists could properly study the site. That destruction still shapes the mystery surrounding the plates today. No one knows exactly how many originally existed, how they were positioned inside the mound, or what ceremonies may have surrounded them. What is certain, however, is that the people who created these objects possessed remarkable artistic ability, sophisticated symbolic knowledge, and access to trade networks stretching across enormous distances.
The plates themselves are made from thin sheets of hammered copper, embossed with intricate imagery. Human figures appear on many of them, though these are clearly not ordinary people. They wear elaborate headdresses, carry ceremonial objects, and stand in rigid poses that almost make them appear weightless or suspended between worlds. Some figures possess wings, while others seem caught mid-transformation, blending human and supernatural traits together into something difficult to define. Their faces are stylized and intense, their eyes sharp and focused, their bodies marked with repeating symbols that appear across multiple plates. What immediately separates the Spiro copper plates from simpler forms of ancient metalwork is the extraordinary level of craftsmanship. These are not crude or accidental creations. The engraved lines are controlled, deliberate, and confident. Muscles are suggested through subtle curves and carefully shaped contours. Feathers overlap in layered detail. The artists clearly understood anatomy, proportion, movement, and the use of negative space. More importantly, they understood symbolism at an advanced level. Every detail feels intentional, as though removing even a single line would alter the meaning entirely.
Copper itself deepens the mystery. There are no natural copper deposits anywhere near Spiro. The material almost certainly traveled hundreds of miles, likely from the Great Lakes region, through vast trade routes that existed centuries before European arrival in North America. That fact alone proves Spiro was not an isolated settlement. It was connected to a continent-wide system of exchange involving goods, ideas, rituals, and belief systems shared across enormous distances. Most archaeologists place the plates within the broader Mississippian cultural tradition, dating roughly between 900 and 1450 AD. This era saw the rise of large ceremonial centers, massive earthen mounds, and highly structured social hierarchies throughout much of eastern North America. Yet the Spiro plates represent more than wealth or political power. They appear deeply tied to cosmology and sacred belief. Many of the figures are thought to represent beings connected to the Mississippian spiritual universe, especially entities associated with the upper world, a realm linked to birds, the sky, order, and divine authority.
One recurring figure is often identified as the Birdman, a winged warrior or supernatural being associated with ritual combat, renewal, status, and sacred authority. Similar imagery appears throughout the Mississippian world in shell carvings, stone engravings, and copper artifacts found at distant ceremonial sites. Yet the Spiro examples feel unusually refined and authoritative, almost as though they were not simply local interpretations, but central expressions of the tradition itself. That possibility raises an important question. Was Spiro merely participating in a widespread religious system, or was it one of the major centers shaping that system? Some scholars believe Spiro functioned as a powerful ceremonial hub where sacred objects were produced, used in rituals, and eventually buried during elaborate funerary ceremonies. The Craig Mound, where the copper plates were discovered, appears to have served as a charnel house, a sacred structure where the remains of important individuals were temporarily placed before final burial elsewhere.
If that interpretation is correct, then the copper plates may never have been personal possessions in the ordinary sense. They may have served as ritual objects,
displayed or worn briefly during ceremonies before being intentionally removed from circulation. Their burial may have symbolized the completion of a spiritual cycle, the death of a lineage, or the closing of a religious era. The imagery itself only deepens the uncertainty because many of the figures feel profoundly otherworldly. Certain images resist easy classification entirely. Limbs bend at unnatural angles. Human and animal traits merge together within the same figure. Symbols float around bodies without obvious explanation or physical grounding. These details have led some researchers to connect the imagery to shamanic visions, trance experiences, or altered states of consciousness. Even today, viewing photographs or museum displays of the plates creates an unsettling impression of movement. The figures do not appear frozen or lifeless. They seem suspended mid-transition, caught between physical and spiritual worlds in ways modern viewers cannot fully understand.
That sensation is difficult to explain, yet it appears consistently across several different plates. Another striking detail is the apparent lack of practical function. The copper sheets are too thin to serve as armor and too fragile for ordinary decorative use. Some edges remain sharp or unfinished, suggesting they were never intended for comfort or daily wear. This strengthens the idea that they were ceremonial objects meant to exist briefly within sacred rituals before being hidden away permanently. The tragedy surrounding the Spiro copper plates is that much of their original context vanished almost immediately after discovery. Looters used dynamite to break into the mound, collapsing chambers and mixing artifacts that had once been placed carefully according to ritual order. By the time professional archaeologists arrived, much of the original arrangement had already been destroyed beyond recovery. Even so, enough survived to reveal that these plates were not isolated artistic experiments. They belonged to a coherent worldview that linked identity, spiritual power, social order, and the structure of the cosmos together.
The Wichita Mountains rise suddenly from the plains of southwestern Oklahoma. Ancient granite formations breaking through miles of open grassland that feels almost too flat to prepare you for their presence. These mountains are among the oldest exposed rock formations in North America, shaped and worn down over hundreds of millions of years by weather, heat, and time itself. At first glance, they do not appear especially dramatic. Yet the longer you remain there, the more weight they seem to carry. The stone feels ancient in a way that is difficult to explain clearly, settled and watchful, as though it has witnessed too much history to care about the people briefly crossing through it. Hidden throughout this rugged landscape are mysterious stone enclosures that refuse to fit comfortably into any simple historical category. They are not forts in the traditional military sense. They are not villages, homes, or clearly recognizable settlements. Instead, they appear as low walls, circular or semicircular arrangements of carefully stacked stone, sometimes standing only waist high, sometimes collapsed into rough outlines, barely visible until you stop and look closely. Many visitors pass directly beside them without noticing at all.
Part of that invisibility comes from how naturally the structures blend into their surroundings. The granite used to build them matches the surrounding rock almost perfectly, making the enclosures feel less like human constructions and more like extensions of the mountains themselves. That blending seems deliberate. Whoever built these structures was not trying to dominate the landscape or separate themselves from it. They were working with the land rather than against it. The first question most people ask is obvious. What exactly were these enclosures meant for? That is also the point where certainty disappears. No clear consensus exists. Some enclosures occupy elevated positions overlooking broad sections of the surrounding plains. Others are hidden in shallow valleys or placed beside rock outcrops that naturally block wind and soften sound. A few stand near seasonal water sources, while others appear in locations that feel inconvenient for practical everyday use. That inconsistency strongly suggests they did not all serve one straightforward purpose. Early interpretations often focused on defense.
Stone walls placed on high ground naturally encourage that assumption. Yet, the closer the structures are examined, the less convincing the defensive explanation becomes. Most walls are too low to provide serious protection. They lack reinforced positions, narrow entrances, or strategic layouts expected in defensive architecture. In many cases, nearby terrain offers much stronger natural defensive positions that were never used. If protection from attack was the primary goal, these enclosures do not reflect it clearly. Another theory proposes that the walls functioned as corrals or hunting structures designed to direct animals into confined spaces. Similar features appear across open plains where coordinated animal drives once took place. But the rugged terrain of the Wichita Mountains complicates that interpretation as well. Animal movement through the rocky hills is unpredictable, and the enclosures rarely appear positioned along natural migration routes or funnels. The structures feel organized around human presence rather than the movement of prey.
What becomes more noticeable instead is the deliberate act of marking space itself. Building even low stone walls requires effort, coordination, and intention. Carrying and stacking heavy granite is not something done casually, especially in an environment where temporary shelter could be created far more easily through other means. The decision to construct these enclosures suggests that the specific locations mattered deeply to the people who built them. Some archaeologists believe the structures may have served ceremonial, social, or communal purposes. They may have been gathering places where groups met seasonally for rituals, decision-making, teaching, fasting, or rites of passage. The circular form of many enclosures supports that possibility. Circles naturally create shared space without emphasizing hierarchy. There is no front or back, no elevated position claiming authority over the rest. Everyone inside participates equally within the boundary created by the stones.
Historically, the Wichita Mountains carried spiritual significance for several indigenous groups connected to the region, including ancestors of the Wichita, Comanche, and Kiowa peoples. Even after displacement and forced removal reshaped life across the southern plains, oral traditions continued to describe these mountains as spiritually important. Sacred landscapes often gather layers of meaning over long periods of time. One group's ritual location may later become another group's place of respect or ceremony, even if the original purpose fades from memory. That layering may explain why the enclosures differ so much from one another in size, placement, and form. They may not belong to a single era or cultural moment at all. Some structures could be thousands of years old, while others may have been created much later in response to features already standing there. The mountains themselves do not reset between cultures. They accumulate memory through repeated human attention across generations. One of the most intriguing aspects of the sites is how little evidence of ordinary life surrounds them. Unlike long-term settlements or camps, the enclosures contain very little debris. Few tools have been recovered nearby. There is limited evidence of cooking fires or domestic activity. That absence suggests restraint and intentional use. These were likely not places where people remained for extended periods. They were spaces entered temporarily and then left behind carefully.
Standing inside one of these stone circles today creates a subtle but unmistakable shift in perception. Sound changes slightly within the walls. Wind moves differently across the enclosed space. Your attention narrows without fully understanding why. The effect is not dramatic, but it is enough to make you aware that you are standing inside something intentional rather than simply standing on open ground. That psychological shift alone hints at purpose. The mountains intensify the experience. Granite absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly after sunset. Temperatures shift noticeably between stone and open grassland. Shadows move differently across uneven surfaces. During sunrise and sunset, light spreads across the granite in ways that can feel strangely deliberate, almost as though the landscape itself participates in the atmosphere of the place.
For cultures closely connected to seasonal cycles and environmental changes, those effects would likely have carried meaning. Some researchers have suggested loose astronomical alignments connected to certain enclosures. A few appear roughly oriented towards sunrise or sunset positions during seasonal transitions, such as solstices or equinoxes. The alignments are not precise enough to classify them as scientific observatories by modern standards, but precision may never have been the intention. Recognizing and marking seasonal change itself may have been sufficient.
Another possibility is that the enclosures functioned as boundaries, not political borders, but thresholds between different states of experience. They may have been places connected to vision quests, fasting rituals, spiritual preparation, or instruction. The Wichita Mountains provide an ideal setting for that kind of activity. They are isolated without being unreachable, demanding without becoming uninhabitable. What makes interpretation difficult is how little direct evidence survives. Stone remains while organic materials disappear. Without preserved wood, cloth, or written records, archaeologists are forced to rely on patterns, comparisons, and careful restraint when drawing conclusions. That restraint matters. It is easy to transform uncertainty into exaggerated fantasy, but the Wichita Mountains do not require embellishment to feel compelling. Modern threats continue to endanger these sites. Erosion gradually weakens the structures, while foot traffic and well-intentioned visitors sometimes rearrange stones without realizing they are altering something ancient. Because many of the enclosures are not fenced or heavily marked, their preservation depends largely on awareness and respect. Once stones are moved, the original arrangement and context may be lost permanently.